Good morning. I'm Pastor Chavaleh, and I'm delighted to welcome you virtually to Mount Cross this morning. Because it's Black History Month, I'm continuing to lift up some Black theologians. And today I'm going to read a sermon that is by the Reverend Otis Moss III. And it's from this book of his. It's on my Kindle, so I printed the uh, title page, or the cover rather. The whole book is called The Gospel According to the Wiz, and other sermons from cinema. It's a great book, fascinating ways of looking at the gospel through some modern pieces of art. And The Wiz particularly is a wonderful musical. If you're not familiar with it, it is a reimagining of The Wizard of Oz. And Dorothy is a young girl from Harlem, and there's wonderful gospel music throughout. Highly recommend it. This book was published in 2014, so it is a snapshot of life 11 years ago. And I would also note that this is a sermon preached at a Black church by a Black theologian. There is a lot of content where he's speaking directly to his congregation, and it doesn't apply to me as a person of my experiences. But I really believe that being a snapshot of history for a congregation that's outside my experience, that listening and reading helps us to develop empathy and develop a greater appreciation for the experiences of others that are different from ours. And that's not really something that we can quantify. Everybody has different experiences from ours. So the more we can develop empathy for others' experience, the more we are able to love our neighbor. So, also, because of a different tradition, this is a longer sermon than I would preach, but it has a lot of great content. So I hope you stick with it. If you can't spend the time now, come back to it. Again, this is from the Gospel According to the Wiz, and this is called The Miseducation of the Scarecrow, preached by Otis Moss III. If you have your blueprints for salvation, the guide upon our journey, the rudder of your ship, I would ask that you would turn to Romans 12, beginning with verse 2. I'll read the New International Version and the OM3 Wiz translation. Romans 12, verse 2 reads this way: Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. Another translation directly from the Greek could be, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, God's good, pleasing, and perfect will. Another translation, the Wiz translation, would read this way: Do not conform any longer to what the crows are saying to you, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, God's good, pleasing, and perfect will. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading and hearing of God's holy word. Beloved, I would venture to say that two of the most profound and powerful works of intellectual and academic rigor of the 20th century were written by two intellectual giants. One gentleman, now long gone, was Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Professor Woodson has two books I would urge every Trinitarian to get a copy of. Download them on your iPad, Kindle, or e-reader. If you have children or grandchildren, make it a requirement that they read these before they obtain their driver's license or graduate from high school. The first book Carter G. Woodson wrote that I would suggest everybody get a copy of is The Miseducation of the Negro. Another title that many people are not aware of is a companion book entitled The Education of the Negro prior to 1861. Those two books will help you understand our current condition probably better than many of the other academic books that have been written in the last 20 or 30 years. The second intellectual giant is a gentleman by the name of W.E.B. Du Bois, one of our founders of the NAACP, a Pan-Africanist and an early feminist. His classic book that no library should be without, and that every high school and college student should have a copy of, is a text entitled The Souls of Black Folk. Both intellectual giants, Du Bois and Woodson, discovered that after emancipation, the question for Southerners and for anti-slavery Northerners alike was this: do people kissed by nature's sun have the intellectual capacity to learn? Or are they simply mental infants doomed to live a life of servitude? Du Bois and Woodson both clearly state that education provided by the Freedmen's Bureau and missionary schools failed to meet the needs of post-Civil War freed African slaves. After freed Africans were emancipated, there had to be a plan to deal with them. For those who may not be familiar, the Freedmen's Bureau was set up after the Emancipation Proclamation to provide schooling and housing for those freed Africans. Out of the Freedmen's Bureau came the idea of 40 acres and a mule. Many of the schools set up by the Freedmen's Bureau and Northern missionaries unintentionally and intentionally miseducated people of African descent because of several fundamental flaws in their educational philosophy. Educational philosophy is what those in education call pedagogy. The first flaw and wrong assumption they made that led to miseducation was that Africans were intellectual midgets, and education designed to free the mind and emancipate the spirit would be of no value. While many held this belief, there were others in the South who believed that if you educated people of African descent who were already skilled and intelligent, they would then take over the jobs that should go to poor white Southerners. Because of emancipation and the fear of educated Africans, another organization was created just in case Africans were educated and ended up taking someone else's job. Therefore, in order to take their country back, whites created the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. And that organization was specifically designed to make sure that people of African descent after emancipation would not be educated and threaten the class balance or infrastructure that had developed as a result of slavery. Remember now, the people who were the blacksmiths were black folk. The people who were the metal workers were black folk. The people who knew agriculture were black people. The people who knew how to build homes were black people. The skilled labor of the South came from people of African descent. The first fundamental flaw in the Freedmen's Bureau was the idea that Africans were intellectual or that their skills would replace those of poor whites. The second flawed assumption was that Africans never contributed anything to civilization. As a result of these flaws, those who taught people of African descent taught them as if they had never existed in history. These two fundamental assumptions, taken together, produce something negative in our own community. When many people of African descent were educated, they did not necessarily in any way want to connect with their own community. They wanted to run as far as they could from anything that looked as though it might be connected in some way to being black. Those of African descent whom Du Bois talks about comprised the talented tenth, those who actually had a degree, wanted to have nothing to do with other people of African descent. They wanted to be more European than the Europeans, and it is Woodson who says this is the basis of miseducation. Education should illuminate. Education should free the mind. Education should not chain someone. Instead, education should set one free. The Freedmen's Bureau and the missionary schools created a model of education that prepared men and women not to build their own communities, to develop their own families, to contribute to democracy. Rather, that education was designed especially for Africans who stayed in the South so that they could be better field hands. Students did not go to school for 9 months, but instead went to school for only 3 months, because the majority of their time was spent picking cotton, even though they were free. The Freedmen's Bureau and the missionary schools designed education to help people of African descent be comfortable in the field, so that even though they had been released from the field, they would be educated only to deal with the field. The, the education system was designed to get them comfortable being in the field, staying in the field, hanging out in the field, living in the field, marrying in the field, just spending all their time in the field because they would work for somebody else for the rest of their lives. The education was designed to tell them that there is nothing beyond this field. There is nothing beyond this place. You must get it in your mind that you cannot look beyond the field, that you must stay in this field for the rest of your life. Don't bother trying to leave the field, because you are to stay in the field. And I must admit to you that, watching the film The Wiz, it dawned on me when I saw a particular character that there was a connection to our history, and the story was upon the screen. The Wiz, as you know, is based upon the play by Charles Small and the book by L. Frank Baum. The Wiz is the story of Dorothy, a young woman from Harlem who is caught in a storm and transported to Oz. As a result of her arrival in Oz, she liberates the Munchkins, who had been captured by Evermean, sister of Eveline, the Wicked Witch of the West. Dorothy is given silver slippers by the Good Witch Glinda and told that if she wants to get out of Oz, she has to find the Wizard of Oz, who has the power to help her home. The only way to the Emerald City is by following a yellow brick road, and one just eases on down there. Once she is upon her journey, Dorothy stumbles upon a scarecrow played with perfection by a young Michael Jackson, before Off the Wall and Thriller. Dorothy stumbles upon this Michael Jackson as a scarecrow. His job is to stay in the field. The scarecrow works in the field, lives in the field, is never to leave the field. The scarecrow believes his purpose is only in the field. He does not own the field, but works the field for someone else. He has spent his entire life in the field. Being a good scarecrow means that you keep your position of powerlessness. When you're a good scarecrow, you stay in your position. When you're being a real good scarecrow, you keep the pole up your back. Yes, you keep the pole up your back and stay in your position and do not move. And what is fascinating here is that, on a subconscious level, when you saw the scarecrow, I lost my place. Oh. If you look at a picture of the scarecrow, you will understand that the filmmakers wanted you to think about lynching or being on an auction block on a subconscious level when you saw the scarecrow. This isn't the scarecrow from the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz. This is the scarecrow from The Wiz, and it looks like he's on an auction block. When Dorothy finds the scarecrow, we have no idea of his history. We don't know what scarecrow people have done throughout civilization. We don't know his background, but there's something we do know about the scarecrow in The Wiz. The only reason he's in his position is because he has crows around him. The crows want to keep him in the field. The only reason Scarecrow is still in the field is because of the crows. Now let me say it at the outset, we all have crows in our life. And not every crow is black, and not every crow is white. There are black crows, there are white crows, there are brown crows, there are brother crows, there are sister crows. Some of you have dated crows. There are crows in your family, and some of you have divorced crows. Every crow you know has the same mentality. They all want you to stay in the field. Your freedom signals their demise. If you are liberated, they lose their meal ticket. As long as you are on the pole, unable to dream, stuck in your position of powerlessness, you give power to the crows in your life, because crows want you to go against your purpose and ignore your anointing. In the film, there are crow commandments. The crows make Michael Jackson recite the crow commandments. The number one crow commandment is, "Thou shalt honor all crows." In other words, you have to believe that the crows are superior to you. As long as you believe the crows are superior to you, then you will stay in your position in the field. You're never to believe you are on the same level as the crows, because the crows say, "Thou shalt honor all crows." In addition to that, the other thing that messes me up is the repetitive scenario in the film in which Michael Jackson is always attempting to read something. He pulls some stuffing out of his own body and begins to read. He will read, and then the crows will respond in unison. "Come on, you got to recite the crow commandments. Thou shalt honor all crows, and thou shalt not read." That's fascinating. Here are some crows telling a young man who has some potential but doesn't know it that he should not bother reading because reading will liberate him. Reading will expand his mind. Reading will open up new horizons. Sadly, there are crows around our children telling them they do not need to read because if they start reading, they might get out of the field. If you start reading, you'll come down from that pole. If you start reading, you will realize that you are created in the image of God. We cannot have that kind of empowerment in our community because while you are up there on the pole, you might recognize what we, the crows, have known all along, that there is power in you. After the crows tell you honor all crows, then they tell you don't read. Next, they state the third commandment that you must remember. Thou shalt never come down. In other words, stay in your position. Don't ever think outside the box. If you ever think that you can run the country, we'll get a whole bunch of crows to remind you you weren't supposed to come out of the field in the first place. Thou shalt never come down. The scarecrow believed he was stupid. He believed the stereotype that the crows had created for him. This belief system isn't anything that Scarecrow created. The crows designed it for him and miseducated him, and now he's operating with a crow mentality. Part of the challenge is we have believed everything the crows told us. Yes, I recognize we're in a state of emergency. Yes, I recognize that the dropout rate is 50% for Black boys. Yes, I recognize that we are filling up the jails. However, this is not in our DNA. This is not who we are. Thank God there are some brothers who did not listen to the crows in their life. And if you are one of the brothers who made it out of the field, if you are one of the sisters who made it out of the field, if you came down from the pole, stepped out of that place, then it is your duty to make sure somebody else comes out of the field. You have to stop listening to the crows. If you're stuck up there on a pole with a crow mentality, you need to come down. Do not listen to all the crows in the media. You need to know that you have the fingers of a Herbie Hancock and the breath control of a Wynton Marsalis. You have the intellect of a Cornel West, the hermeneutical prowess of a Jeremiah Wright. You have the poetic touch of a Saul Williams, the business mind of a Tom Burrell, the educational acumen of a Robert Franklin. Do not listen to the crows, because if you listen to the crows, you will always stay stuck on the pole. For one reason or another, you can decide to confound the world. The world, from the moment we landed in America, set it up so we would stay in the field. Can you imagine that? An entire government was against a group of people, but look at what God has done. The resources of the wealthiest country on the planet were designed to keep you in one particular place, but look, you have transformed the country. Now one who was told that he could never enter the house through the front door is running the thing. Crows don't have any authority. You have to understand this and stop thinking small. Stop thinking like crows. As for Paul, when he writes in Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to the culture of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. He was talking to people who were listening to Roman crows. The Roman crows were saying, stop following this man, Jesus. You need to follow Julius Caesar. Caesar is the Son of God. But Paul is saying that you need to renew your mind. Because if you get your mind straight, in the words of George Clinton, everything else will follow. If you get your mind straight, then all of a sudden you will see the world in a completely different way. God is calling God's people to renew their minds and not be miseducated by the crows. How do you tell who the crows are? You have to be careful. Remember this, you can always tell crows. However, you cannot just look at the exterior and detect a crow, because there are some crows that look good to you, some crows that look strange to you, some crows that are riding nice, and there are some crows rolling in their hoop ties. Doesn't matter what's on the outside. You can tell a crow by two things. You can tell a crow by what the crow says and by the other birds the crow hangs out with. Crows roll with crows. Crows do not hang with eagles, and they never sing with sparrows. Crows hang out with other crows, and they like other crows around them so they can talk crow business. And I'm sorry to let you know that there are even crows in the church. I have to be honest, I can't stand being around crow folk because all they want to talk about is something negative. The God we serve has done great things. Even when I wake up in the morning and it is raining outside and cold, I'm still thankful. I cannot have crow thinking in my spirit. And I'm here to let you know that you need to tell the crows next to you to go on and shoo. Shoo the crows away. It's easy to get rid of crows. All you have to do is say, get on out of here. See, crows will not hang around when you start talking good things. Crows will not hang around when you talk about the goodness of the Lord. So we see that this scarecrow has been miseducated. Crows always hang out in flocks. And the reason they mess with Scarecrow and want Scarecrow to be miseducated is because he's a threat. The real reason that the crows are after you or after us is because we represent a threat. If you have no crows in your life, if you cannot find any crows around you, if you look to your left and your right, there's no feathers next to you, then you might be one of the crows. Crows have a problem with Scarecrow because he's a threat. And when you watch the film, you will see that they are trying to get him to stay miseducated. But Scarecrow wants to renew his mind. But consider this about the film and also about this text. Even though the crows want Scarecrow to stay in his position, they don't realize that putting him in his position always elevates him. Even though the crows are keeping Scarecrow in the position on the pole, he is still elevated above the crows. Because of his elevation, they have to look up to him. There's somebody else I know who was elevated when some crows thought they were actually destroying him. However, he was able to draw all unto God. You have to be careful whom you try to destroy, because in the process, you may end up blessing them. Jesus had crows, Pharisee crows, Sadducee crows. Peter acted like a crow. Judas was a crow. Crows can be in your inner circle. You can be possessed by a crow mentality. Even Peter, the one upon whom the church would be built, acted crow-like from time to time. The question before us is, how do we get out of the field? If we've been miseducated, how do we get out of the field, brothers? How do we get out of the field, sisters? Well, there's a simple thing that happened in the film that happens when your mind is renewed and you realize that you do not have to stay in the field. Watch what happens. Although the crows were controlling the Scarecrow, he was elevated. But if he had been down on the field when Dorothy came along, she would have missed him on her way to the Emerald City. Because he was elevated, Dorothy was able to see him. And because she was able to see him, she was able to shoo the crows away from him. As Dorothy, played by Diana Ross, is shooing the crows away, she says, "You need to come on down." But Scarecrow Michael Jackson says, "I can't walk." She says, "Come on down. You're just a victim of negative thinking." Dorothy brings him down. Dorothy helps him out. The reason he is able to come down and move to his purpose is because somebody intervened in his life. Stop trying to act like you came down all by yourself, like you did it yourself and didn't have any help. There was somebody who saw what you were going through, stepped into your situation, liberated you from the crows, and now you are easing on down the yellow brick road on your way to being liberated. Scarecrow needed somebody to believe in him, to say that all you have to do is put your best foot forward and ease on down this road. And everybody here, all of us, are beneficiaries of somebody who intervened in our field and said we didn't belong there. Stop trying to act like you've been in church forever and have been perfect all your life. There was somebody praying for you. There was somebody lifting you up to let you know that you didn't belong where you were, where you may be currently. I'm here to get you out of your field. Scarecrow had to learn to walk on his own. His mind was renewed as a result of his connection to Dorothy. When you're connected to the right people, they can put you on the right path. When you're connected to the right folk, they will put you on a path where you will be able to receive what God is calling you to do. When the right people put you on the right path, you can ease on down the road and find out that you actually have some power in you. Now, what I like about the movie is that Michael Jackson says, "I don't have a brain," and yet he did have a word in him that he kept pulling out and he kept reading. "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." He kept pulling a word out. "No weapon formed against me shall prosper." He kept pulling a word out and found out that the Lord is my light and my salvation. He kept pulling a word out and found out that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He kept pulling a word out. "They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength." I'm here to let you know that if you have a word in you, when you get in trouble, you can pull it out. Pull it out. Pull the word that's already in you out. God has put a word in you. God will put a word in you, and when you pull the word out that God has put in you, you find out you can walk by yourself. It was a scarecrow who found the yellow brick road and found out that if you ease on down the road, don't you carry nothing that might be a load. Just ease on down the road. You need to put your right foot in front of you and trust the Lord with all thy heart, and lean not into thine own understanding, and he will make thy paths straight. God put something in you so that you will no longer be miseducated, so you will have power in you. You have strength in you. You have God's strength, so keep on. God does not want you miseducated. Somebody, we do not know who, filled the scarecrow with the word. That somebody was gone. We don't know who it was. But in the time of trouble, the scarecrow could reach in and pull some stuff out. It's the same with you. I don't know if it was your grandma. I don't know if it was your mama. I don't know if it was your daddy. They may not be here with you, but they put something in you. Stop acting like you can't walk for yourself. Stop acting like you can't deal with those crows. God put something in you already. All you have to do is reach down and pull it out. Reach down and pull it out. This is what God is calling us to understand. Don't let crows define you or tell you who you are. You are a child of God. Stop saying, "I don't have anything in my head." You have enough in you to sustain yourself. And when you realize you have something in you, you will notice that the crows disappear. No longer will they hang out with you. Crows want to hang out in the field with you, but as soon as you get a new address, you will move to another altitude to which crows cannot fly. God wants you to understand that there is something already in you. Many thanks to Reverend Otis Moss III for that incredible sermon. I hope that you have learned something today that enlarges your perspective and helps create empathy. And maybe there's something that you could relate to as well. I know that there was for me. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you Sunday.